evening and welcome to Face to Face, the show where we talk with local broadcasters here in South Dakota. Today on the show we have Stacy Bauer and John Wilson from KELO this morning. Thank you both for being with us today.
You're welcome.
Now, I was going over both of your biographies that you have on your website, and I noticed that both of you, before doing the morning show, were both sportscasters. Now,
our theme was reunited when John came to the morning show.
Is that how you did? You know, did you ever think that you were going to start in sports and move right onto a morning show?
Well, to tell you the truth, I actually started in news before I got into sports. It was at a different TV station. I started shooting news as a photographer, and then I started reporting news, and there was an opening in sports, and I just basically dove into sports since it's kind of a natural progression. That's what I was looking to do back then, and then just recently it was another news job opened up over at KELO, which was a little better for me, so I took it.
When did you two decide to go into broadcasting? What was your first interest?
Oh, I probably decided when I was about 16.
Well, how did you...
Well, I wanted a job where I could write. And if you ask my mom or my dad, they'll tell you that I'm a big ham as well. So I get to do writing, and I get to be on TV.
And she gets to talk a lot.
Exactly, I get paid to talk.
Yeah.
So
for me, it wasn't as early for me. It was a little later on in life. I'd gone to USD for a year after I graduated from O'Gorman High School, and spent a year. You know how freshman years in college, you'll understand this in a year or two. But you know, had no focus or anything. Just basically went down there and went through the motions. And finally, I had an ultimatum. I had to find a career path, so I chose broadcasting.
Did you guys have any education in high school before college with broadcasting?
not with television or radio broadcasting. With print, you know, the school newspaper, that kind of a thing. But the school I went to was small town. We didn't have anything like you guys have here in Sioux Falls.
Yeah, me neither at O'Gorman. We didn't really have any TV or radio classes over there. Just, you know, basically writing class, your basic English classes. And I really didn't choose radio and TV. I started in radio a few years
Way back when.
Yeah. But I didn't really choose that until after, as I mentioned before, I went to USD for a year, and then I went to Brown Institute of Minneapolis, which is radio.
What college did you go to, Stacy?
Southwest State University in Marshall.
So these weren't real, these weren't your national big, broadcasting schools. They were here local. Were they, did you get a lot out of them?
Actually, Brown Institute is a national broadcasting school. It's one of it's a pretty predominant broadcasting school, and I had heard of a few people in the past that have gone up there. And at least in my case, I went to college for a year, and I really didn't want to wait around 4 more years to start my career. When I finally decided what I was going to do. And at the time, Brown Institute, you went up there and it was 10 months. The whole curriculum was 10 months, and their placement department, 95% placement, and so, I mean, they zoom you right through it, teach you the basics, and send you out on your own. So that's kind of what appealed to me.
And what did you learn at Southwest?
A little bit of everything. Well, I majored in speech. I also studied political science, which is another interest of mine, so that's part of the reason I went for the 4-year university degree, because I wanted to have something else to fall back on in case the TV thing didn't work out. But I learned quite a bit there. They taught me everything from radio to TV to doing interview shows to productions, theater type productions. We did a little bit of everything. We had a daily newscast.
They kind of throw it all at you. I mean, when you're learning, when you're trying to get into the broadcast business.
Just so you can see kind of what's out
there.
there.
Well, yeah, everything from radio to TV, even sales. I mean, they taught us up at Brown Institute how to sell both radio and TV ads, and I did that for 6 months and decided real quick I wasn't a salesman.
What were your first jobs in television?
This one. Actually, I started out in news as an intern at KELO, and then onto the sports scene, and I was there for about 3 years, and then I moved to the morning show. So KELO was my first job. What
was your impression when you first got there? What it was back with Steve Hemmingson. Doug Allen was still there. Dave Dedrick was still there.
Right, Dave Dedrick was still
there. You had a lot of local legends there.
Right, and the thing is, I grew up in central Minnesota, so I didn't quite get the whole local legends thing until everybody kept asking me, you work with Captain 11, you work with Steve Hemmingson, and I'm like, yeah, it took me about a year before I figured out that, they'd become kind of icons.
Kind of different from me. I mean, I grew up in Sioux Falls, so I grew up with, the big news with Doug Lund and Steve, and I even remember back Leo Hardig and those guys, you know, back when I was a kid. And, you know, I always thought about maybe getting into TV back as a kid. I was never really serious about it, but I just couldn't imagine I'd be working here, you know, some 20,
Where did you
20
start?
years later. I actually started in radio up in a small town up in northeast South Dakota, a town called Eden. Population about 112 at the time, and it was a brand new radio station. I was fresh out of school, you know, in my low 20s, and yeah, it was basically just your basic nuts and bolts job. I mean, making about $800 a month.
Wow.
Eating a lot of fast food.
A lot of ramen noodles when you first start out in this business.
When you started out, were there any particular you know, persons that you looked up to, your heroes or so forth?
I wouldn't say I had anybody in particular. I remember when I was in 7th grade and I thought Connie Chung was just the greatest thing in the world. But after that, I just kind of took a little bit out of everybody that I saw, because there were some people that I liked, some I didn't, things they did that I didn't like. So I didn't really have, quote, one person that I looked up to.
Yeah, kind of me too. I mean, there's always Tom Brokaw, you know, South Dakota native. I mean, that's kind of appealing too after you get into it. But you're right, you just have to take a little piece from everybody you do, you know, admire as you kind of work your way up.
And they told me too, when I first got into television, and I also do some part-time radio, they told me that the biggest mistake you can make is trying to be somebody else.
Really?
To not be yourself.
And you learn that really quick, especially in radio. I mean, you know, depending on what station you get into. I mean, back then there wasn't a lot of talk radio stations. I mean, you know, it was a lot of top 40 stuff, and there really wasn't a chance to just go off and be yourself. You know, there's a lot of one-liners you had to read, and I mean, there's a mandatory amount of songs you had to play every hour, and that's kind of why it just, you know, after 4 or 5 years of it, I kind of got bored.
When did you leave radio?
Gee, probably
Way back when.
late 80s. So that's another thing. I'm the so-called old-timer on the morning crew with Stacy Bauer and Sean Cable. You know.
Did you just get tired of radio, or was there...
I just did. Well, you know, I didn't really work the primo time slots either. I mean, I did a lot of, you know, midnight to 6 is what you do. Overnights all the time, and, you know, and, yeah, it just... the timing thing, you're always working one shift and then the next week you're working another shift. That's kind of what happens when you aren't established on the air and you don't have a set time slot, you know. So yeah, I, you know, did that for 6 or 7 years and thought I'd give TV a try, so that's when I came
Where'd you
to Sioux
start at
Falls.
TV?
I started here in Sioux Falls at the NBC affiliate here in Sioux Falls. And, you know, as I mentioned before, I started shooting news on my own time, and the news director at the time hired me as a reporter, and, you know, I just kind of basically did,
Climb the ladder.
Climb the ladder. You know, you cover bake sales and stuff like that, you know, before you get any of the good stories, but after time it paid off.
How is sports different from other news? In the, you know, you've got regular generic news, you've got weather, and then you've got sports. How is sports different from the other news?
Well, in some
reporting?
ways, it's a lot alike, and I don't think people realize how much sports crosses over into news and how much it crosses over into your daily life. But I noticed the big difference is when you're working in sports, everything is just nonstop. You got to go to this game, you got to go to that game, you got to be at this story, you got to be that story. There's a state tournament, there's a state tournament there, and I know with our shift now, it's more demanding, sitting right there. It's the same intensity, but you're sitting at a keyboard and typing, or you're sitting on the set versus driving all over town and to Huron and back and over to Aberdeen and back out to Rapid City.
And a lot of people say, you know, if you grow up liking sports, you would grow up liking to be a sportscaster. But in a way, I mean, you like watching sports, but especially when you're working around South Dakota, there's just so much to cover, you know, and you have limited amount of staff you're working with, especially when you're on the weekends. And the weekends, it's just overwhelming. There's just so much going on, especially around the state tournament time.
How hard are weekends? I mean, how big is your staff? I guess I should say, how big is your staff, and what you know, what are your hours from when to when?
In sports?
In sports?
Well, in sports it was a little different because when Stacy was doing it, it was a 3-person sports crew at KELO. And then I came over and it was still 3 people for a while.
Until I went to the morning show.
Yeah, and then they just never replaced that person. So it went from 3 to 2.
Did that make it harder?
Yeah.
Very much so.
I mean, even once in a while I would come back, and when I was working in news, I'd come back and shoot a football game or two because they didn't have anybody.
And especially, you know, when Tom Neiman was the sports director back then, you know, everybody has to have a weekend. So whenever I would have my weekend on Mondays and Tuesdays, so Tom would be alone, and he would have to cover all this stuff, you know, and you'd get a couple of photographers to come in and help you and shoot some games. But weekends, it's nuts. I mean, you're so worried about covering this and covering that and, you know, getting all this stuff on the air, and the last thing you think about is actually going on the air and presenting it, which in a lot of ways that's what you should be focusing on.
That's what you should be focusing on. And the thing is, if you pick one game over another, you will have people upset. You will have people upset that you didn't come to their game. You will have people upset that you didn't have their score on first.
Was it?
And there's just no way to make everybody happy, and it's a lot of pressure. It really is.
Did you try to, you know, balance? You know, I covered one game this weekend. I'm going to cover another the next. You know, did you try and balance it out, or was it just, you know, too impossible to do it?
You try, I think, but you know, after a while, certain teams are
convenient.
Well,
I mean,
convenience is part of it.
It's bad to say too, but I mean, there's a lot of times, like we mentioned before, you're by yourself. You have to get some games on the air, and so you go out and shoot the closest one. That's why we get criticized a lot for, you know, covering too many Sioux Falls, you know, teams, the Harrisburgs, the West Centrals, you know, and things like that. But
when you have to drive out there, get the video back, and be on the air, people used to say to me a lot when I was shooting highlights, they're like, I can't believe you're out here at the game and you have to work later and you anchor later. I'm like, that's what you do.
Especially in the middle of the summer, you're out sweating and you have
at
to
a
come
Canaries
back
game.
and slap on some makeup and head on the air.
Look pretty.
It's pretty frustrating.
Did you guys look up to the sportscasters? You know, I wouldn't say of the present, but also of the past. You know, Bob Costas, Al Michaels, and back then the greatest. You know, Howard Cosell.
Absolutely.
Was there?
I mean, I thought Howard was a riot watching him. I mean, just his aura on the air. I mean, you know, we were talking about legends before, and there's, you know, probably the biggest legend right there. And plus for Bob Costas, just because he's so knowledgeable about everything. I mean, you throw a sport out, and he's, you know, he's pulling facts out of the air, out of everywhere. And I think that's what kind of impresses me. You know, when you can cover every sport and know
and
everything.
have and understand every sport and what this
exactly.
means in golf and this means in bowling and basketball and.
So that's pretty neat.
But who has it harder in sports? Stacy, did you have a harder time doing it because you were a woman?
Sometimes, I think, maybe initially when I started, because I know we had a female sportscaster around here before, but I was the first one to be on KELO, which goes statewide, and I know a lot of times when I first went to games and I first appeared in those press boxes, I got some looks like, what are you doing here? And kind of got the cold shoulder a few times, but that went away pretty quickly once people got used to me, and people here are so friendly. After a while, it was, you know, they gave me more grief, I think, than they gave the guys, and had more fun with me because we were old pals.
Well, and after she moved to news, I don't know how many places I went, and people were asking me where Stacy was, you know. So I mean, that just goes to show how you know, they did get used to her. They actually missed her.
Oh.
You two now do the morning show together. How is the morning show different from, you know, the 5, 6, or 10 o'clock news?
It's longer.
Yeah, it's
a lot longer.
Yeah, 90
Didn't
minutes.
always used to be that way. In fact, it used to be, you know, just as long as, you know, half an hour.
It used to be just a half an hour. Then I went to an hour. Then they're like, well, we need more news. Let's give you another half an hour. Then they added a 9 o'clock show.
Does that make it more stressful to find stuff to fill? Or?
I don't know if it's stressful. I think it's stressful when there's stuff going on in the morning, you know, breaking news and things like that. But I mean, normally from day to day, I mean, you're the only ones there. I mean, you know, it's us two and a producer and, you know, a production assistant and Sean and a couple of the people in the back room, and it's kind of, it's a little more laid back, I think.
It's like a family kind of an atmosphere, I think.
Yeah, you know, and you fight and you argue and, you know, you gripe here and there, but you just get over with it and move on. You know, I've only been doing the morning for about 6 or 7 months, and I did do the 5 and the 6 and the 10 once, and yeah, a lot more stressful, a lot more people running around. You know, the deadline really comes into play when you're doing those later shows.
What's something that people would be surprised to know about the morning show?
How much I think that we do before we get on the air. I think there's this perception that we come in at about 5 o'clock and powder our noses and sit down and read. Well,
What time do you two actually show up in the
well,
morning?
he shows up around 3, and I get there a little bit later than that, closer to 4, depending on the day and what's going on. But we do a lot of writing. John makes phone calls all over the state every morning. He's calling places, and we write from the time we get in. It's like, good morning, John, good morning, Trace, our producer, and then it's typing nonstop until we're on the air.
Wow.
And the lack of sleep. That's
Oh,
another
really?
challenge.
Yeah.
I'm sure we're all different, but I mean, you usually.
Is it hard then because you have to be a little more, you have to be more cheerful in the mornings?
You have to be awake
you
even
are
if
the
you're
first.
not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
How do you are there times where you can't do it, or it's really hard to?
Well, you don't really have a choice. I mean, you have to go on. Coffee's my crutch. I mean, I never drank coffee until I got into radio, working those overnight shifts. That's when I started drinking coffee. But it's like I said, you really don't have a choice. It's your job. You come in and you have, like Stacy said, you have 3 hours, 2.5 hours before you go onto the air. So if you do have a problem, if you do have other worries, or if you are tired and you really don't, I mean, you have a couple hours to come out of it, and I think that helps.
One thing you probably have been used to on the mornings is that people tune in, especially when there's bad weather, to see about schools and so forth. How do you deal with that, especially like after a big winter storm? How do you deal with that, and what's...
Well, it's heaven now compared to how it used to be, I'll tell you that. Because now we have that clothesline on the bottom of the screen, so schools can just call in and punch in their code, and it goes right on the air. But in the old days, they would call in, a production assistant would answer the phone, they'd write it down, and hopefully it would get back to the people on the set, and there was about 20 different places where it could get lost, and that was a nightmare. And now that goes right on the air, so the schools, if people want to watch the schools, they can just watch there, they can go on the internet and check it out. In the meantime, we can bring them the latest, road conditions and reports from around the state.
Does that save you time because you have to spend less time?
Oh, yeah, a ton of time.
Oh, ton of time.
It is heaven for us. I mean, it gives us more time on the air, but as we mentioned before, you don't get a score on the air, you hear about it. But if you don't get a school closing on, I mean, you hear it from the parents, superintendents, everybody down the road. So.
And it's important to get them on, too,
yeah,
because of the weather. You don't want kids standing out there waiting for a bus that's not going to show up. So that, I think it makes it much more efficient, and there's less chance for a mistake, because before, it was not pretty. You had scratch pieces of paper with, some school late, and
You'd
then
find it under the desk.
and they'd call and
everything,
change, and
So now we have people calling in at about 3:30 saying, "Do we have school? Do we have school?" Even before we get the clothesline.
Superintendents aren't even out of bed yet.
I know.
Kids want to know.
These are just kind of general, best and worst. What's been one of your more interesting stories that you've covered in sports or in news?
Well, I'm a diehard Viking fan, so I love going to training camp. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, that was pretty fun. We've both been up there. Plus the Iditarod, too.
The Iditarod. Yeah,
Oh,
going
really?
to Alaska was incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'd never been up there before, and so I was kind of in awe of how big everything was. I mean,
Really?
Yeah, it was amazing. Just you kind of hated to leave,
Yeah.
because you're only there for 3 or 4 days, and you're on the run from 6 at night until 6 in the morning till 11 at night. But it'd be nice to go up there during the summer.
Yeah,
sometime.
it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. Hands down.
What's been your most embarrassing moment ever on camera?
On camera.
On camera. Well, mine was probably, were you there for the estrogen hydrogen episode?
No, I don't remember that.
This was, maybe it was about a year ago. The space shuttle was taking off with the first woman in command. Do you remember that? If you remember that. I made the mistake, they couldn't take off because there was a hydrogen leak. Well, somehow out of my tired mouth that morning, I said there was an estrogen leak.
Estrogen.
Oh.
Yeah. And it just happened that was the one where there was the first woman in command, and I didn't even realize it till I stopped, and everyone else was laughing, and I'm like, what?
That was pretty convenient.
Yeah. That was right up there.
I guess mine, gee, I don't know. I rarely have embarrassing moments on the air. But I don't know. In recent memory, I guess we do these cut-ins after our show, like during the early show. And our newsroom is downstairs, and so it's up, a flight of stairs into the studio, and I was on the phone or I was doing something, all of a sudden I heard our director say 30 seconds till the cut-in. Well, of course, I just grabbed my jacket, ran upstairs and sat down, and boom, they cued me. And I was totally out of breath, and I had to fill 3 minutes of news. And so, I mean, it was almost like I was having an asthma attack, you know, and I couldn't read, and it was like, it was just like I got kicked in the stomach, you know, you get the air knocked out of you, you know? And I struggled with like 2 stories, and meanwhile, Cable's across the studio, just, you know, in tears, he's laughing so hard. And so I just kind of had to stop and say, okay, now the weather, Sean, take it away. But Sean had a few people come up and ask him, you know, what was wrong with Sean?
Is he okay?
And of course, Sean was like, well, he was really emotional in the story or something like that.
Do you guys enjoy working with Sean? You know, you see him every morning.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think our whole bunch in the morning, it's kind of like a family, you know, right down to the director and the back room and graphics and everything, because when you have to get up that early, I mean, you kind of have to be in a good mood, because if you come in a bad mood, it just ruins your day. So most people, when they come in, even if it's 3, 4, 5 in the morning, are in a pretty good mood, and we just have fun with each other. And I think that helps a lot.
And even if you do come in a bad mood, the perfect person to see right away is Cable.
Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky.
Yeah, I mean, he'll cheer you up in a hurry, you know, but, you know, it is fun. He lightens up the load quite a bit.
What is the rest of your day like after you're done with, you know, the morning show? I mean, you have, you both do the 9 o'clock show, and Stacy, you do noon. But, you know, what? You know, then your day is done. What do you have after that? It's, you know, everyone's day is kind of half over, but yours is sort of finished. How does the rest of it go?
Well, after the 9 o'clock, we both do a little bit of reporting, and then I help with the noon, and sometimes he gets to do more reporting because I can't, you know, I have to keep myself there. But then, you know, like 11:30, 12:30, we're both done for the day because we've been there since the middle of the night.
Which is kind of nice, especially in the summer. You know, you're on the golf course by noon half the time. But I mean, there's Ion Kelolands. We each do, you know, 2 or 3 of those a month, and so you take time and set those up, and you go shoot them. And every now and then they have a, you know, police briefing every morning, 10:30 in the morning. So if the normal person isn't able to go cover it, Stacy or I'll go do that. And so, I mean, there's always things to do. My day is usually 3 to 11. I mean, that's my 8-hour day.
Do you enjoy that, or, you know, do you enjoy having to wake up far earlier than anyone else, but at the same time getting to leave early?
I love the shift, but I hate the hours. Does that make any sense? I mean, it's like, I love the morning show, I love the people I work with, I love the fact that I get done early. I just hate the fact that I have to get up so early.
Yeah.
I can just shift it a few hours.
And for me, Fridays are really tough because I get, you know, my 3-year-old daughter rarely lets me get to sleep before, you know, 9 or 10 o'clock. And, you know, the typical 8-hour sleep,
Never
there's a
have
thing in
night.
the past.
No.
I average about 4 hours of sleep a night. And then on Fridays it usually catches up to me. So, yeah, it's pretty rough, that 8 hours on Friday. But then I make up for it and I sleep till about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday.
I feel like I'm back in grade school where you have to go to bed at about 8 o'clock at night and you take a nap in the afternoon.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, it'll be nice in the summer, but even then, I can't go to bed when it's light out.
No.
It's just won't
Are you
happen.
two still avid sports fans?
Oh, yeah. Oh, huge. We talk about it all the time.
No, which is even kind of nice because now being in news, you can go to a sporting event, you can go to a Skyforce or
And
Stampede
actually
game.
watch and enjoy it.
Yeah, and sit down and enjoy the game instead of staying there and shooting 10 minutes of it. And,
What do you
know,
guys
getting
think of the
around.
local sports scene here in Sioux Falls?
Oh, I think it's great.
I think it's huge.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff here. It's unbelievable for the size of a community to have this much stuff to choose from.
And they're all thriving. I mean, there was a lot of worry back when the Skyforce started, you know. Well, what about Augustana? What about University of Sioux Falls? You know,
And
they're
when
going to
the
suffer.
Stampedes
What do
started,
you
same
What do you guys
thing.
think of the Skyforce right now? Do you think it, you know, now that it's joined the IBL, it'll do very well?
You know, I'm just glad, you know, Greg Heineman and Roger Larson, you know, they stepped up and, you know, they were former owners before, and they kind of saved the franchise before. But I think it was good for the city, and I think somebody had to do it. And I mean, me personally, as a sports fan, I'm glad they did.
I'm glad they did, but I think their future depends on what happens with the IBL and the NBA developing. They're going to develop their own developmental league, and I think that could really play into things. It's not. I don't think the problem will be that there's no support here. I think it'll be some other outside factor to see if they can make it or not.
Well, yeah, and Sioux Falls has always been one of the most successful franchises, you know, especially in the CBA. But I was just, you know, when Isaiah got involved in this thing, I knew when he bought it for 10 and tried to sell it for 30, I knew.
Trouble.
You know, days were numbered. I mean, the CBA is over 50 years old, you know, and for it to fold that quickly, something was going wrong.
Some got messed up.
What do you think of the new XFL? Do you think it's going to last long, or
No.
do you see a short future with it?
I think it's a fad. I mean, if you know, we talk about it all the time that, oh, the ratings dropped again. The ratings dropped again. A lot of people tuned in the first week, and ever since then the ratings have been steadily dropping and continually dropping. And people are addicted to the NFL. People love their NFL teams, and I think it's going to be extremely hard for anything to even try and touch that.
Well, I heard a comparison. Well, you know, everybody compares it to the USFL. You know, I mean, that didn't last very long either. But when you watch these games, I mean, it's almost like watching preseason football for the NFL. I mean, you're watching the second and third and fourth stringers from the NFL, and people aren't going to pay good money to go and see that. And, you know, that's my opinion. And
Yeah, we could be
according to
wrong.
the ratings,
Yeah,
I'm
the
not
ratings
alone.
keep dropping.
Is there ever going to be a time when the two of you will not enjoy mornings anymore and you want to move back to sports, or you want to move to a bigger market?
I could see it just for the fact that, you know, I know how tired I am all the time. I mean, I live for my naps every day. I live to sleep now because you're so exhausted all the time because, like John said, you're only getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, and that really wears on you. So I think after a while, I think there'll come a point where I know, personally, me, just physically as a human being, I don't know if I'll be able to do it. But as far as the shift, I don't mind the shift. I just don't know how you can handle it forever. I don't know if I'd go back into sports, but
Never say never. I mean, that's one thing
Yeah,
I've
you
learned
never
about
know.
this business. It's a wacky business, you know, and I mean, a job's
Do you
a
two
job.
want to move on? Do you want to keep moving? Like, do you want to go to the national level, or do you don't want to retire at KELO-Land?
I think everybody does. I mean, you know, deep down inside, you want to, you know, whether you're good enough or not. But I think, you know, I'm happy where I'm at now. I mean, you know, we all have contracts, and as far as me, I'm going to honor that contract. You know, one thing somebody told me right away in this business: never burn any bridges, because you never know when you're going to see somebody again down the line. And I haven't been in the business that long, and I've already seen people come back through who I've worked with before. You know, so. You know, I always leave the options open. You know, if the job comes along, sure.
you never know.
Where do you two see local news headed in the distant future? Do you see it taking the road that it has now? Do you see it taking a more high road, or do you see it actually taking a low road,
In the
as the way it's presented and the content?
I don't see it taking a low road, because I don't think people here would put up with that. You know, I've been in other markets where I've watched their news, and it's like watching, you know, a current affair or something like that. And
Well, and we've even been accused that here, you know,
Yeah.
sensationalizing stuff and
I don't,
just to make
I
news
don't,
out of it.
I don't think the low road would even be allowed here. I
I
don't
think
think
it's
the
a little
viewers.
too conservative of the state to get away with that, you know. But
Finally, what do you two enjoy about your job?
well, the people. I mean,
Yeah, the people.
you know.
I know it's such a coined answer, but it's true.
Yeah, exactly, and it's different every day. I mean, you know, a lot of people think it's the same every day. You come in, you look at a script, and you read it. But you know, news is different every day. That's what's fun about it.
Do you, you know, is there a reason why you chose television over radio? You know, besides,
I
is
still
it-
do both, so I like them both. But
And I guess for me, you know, after starting out in radio, it's more challenging. You know, it's more upbeat. I like the deadline. You know, it's fast paced.
you like the FaceTime too.
Well, FaceTime. Exactly. That's kind of the last thing.
Well, Stacy, John, thank you so much for being with us here today. I really enjoyed it, and I thank you for watching us today on Face to Face. I'm Avi Forstein, and from all of us here at KELO-TV, good night.